On your 5.2 note sheet that we did in class today, I'm covering problem number 5, which is when you ever have a fraction within a fraction. Now the key to it is that you're going to have more than one term in the denominator. So if you look right here, you have a term here, a term here. When you're facing that situation, and here's the problem that you should copy out. You have secant of x plus 1 in the numerator, and then you have secant of x minus cosine of x in the denominator. So we have two terms in the denominator. Let's start with the numerator. First thing you want to do is change secant of x into sine or cosine form. So it's equal to 1 over cosine. Now I take the 1 right there and turn that into a fraction as well, which is 1 over 1. What I want to eventually do is get a common denominator here to rewrite and add these two. But we'll do that in a moment. Now go down to the secant of x in the numerator or denominator right here. And secant of x becomes 1 over cosine of x. And then we look at cosine of x, and we just write cosine of x over 1. Now, in order to get a common denominator of cosine right here, then I'll need to multiply everything up here by cosine. So I'm going to multiply this whole numerator by cosine of x, and then I'm going to multiply the whole denominator by cosine of x. And that'll allow everything to be in terms of cosine. So I'm going to have cosine of x over here, cosine of x over here, and that really is a form of 1. So I really haven't changed what's in the parentheses at all by multiplying by 1. So when I multiply cosine of x times this fraction, I'll end up with cosine x over cosine of x. That's equal to 1. When I multiply 1 over 1 times cosine of x, I get just cosine of x. Then I do the denominator. And I say cosine of x times this fraction is going to create cosine x over cosine x, and I get a 1. Then cosine of x over 1 times cosine of x gives me cosine squared of x. Now keep in mind that this denominator right here is a difference of perfect squares that we did in a previous problem. So I'm going to now factor out the denominator. And the process we're going to use is the same process we used when we said a squared minus b squared is a plus b times a minus b. So we're going to split this into two different factors right over here. 1 plus cosine of x, 1 minus cosine of x. And when I do that, I can see that 1 plus cosine of x on top and on the bottom both are going to turn into 1. So I drop those two there, and I'm left with 1 over 1 minus cosine of x, which is this factor right here. And when I have that, that's going to be my final answer. 1 over 1 minus cosine of x. For problem setup number 6, we're going to deal with perfect squares, and they're going to be in the form either of a plus b quantity squared, or they'll show this form, a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. And they occur quite a bit. So we need to master these as well. Well, the problem I'm going to give you is this one right here, which is cosine to the 4th of x plus 2 cosine squared of x plus 1 to the 4th. And the whole thing is cosine 4th of x. And that denominator is going to be divided into each one of these terms. Now, normally they won't show 1 to the 4th. They'll just show 1. But if you have a cosine of 4th x here, you want to make this to the 4th power also. Now remember that if I have a squared and I square it again, that's the same as a to the 4th. So basically cosine to the 4th of x is cosine squared of x quantity squared. In other words, cosine to the 4th of x is the same as cosine squared of x. And the whole thing is squared. So I really have a difference of perfect squares in this form right here. I've got something squared plus 2 times a and b, which are front and back, and then the end is squared as well. Well, that 1 to the 4th can also be rewritten as 1 squared quantity squared. So this term right here and this term right here match up with a squared and b squared. So I'm going to take what's inside the parentheses and write it in this form, which is cosine squared of x, which is right there, plus the ending term, which is, again, 1 squared. And that is what we're going to end up with right there. So cosine squared of x plus 1, quantity squared will turn into this if you were to multiply it out. Now that's still divided by the cosine to the 4th power of x. And so what we want to do now is change this item right here. Now if you recognize this identity, cosine squared of x plus 1 is really equal to negative sine squared of x. And that thing is repeated twice. So we have negative sine squared x times negative sine squared x on the numerator. And let's split this up into 2 factors as well, because that's really cosine squared of x times cosine squared of x. So we write that down below as cosine squared of x, cosine squared of x. Now I look at each one of these and say, well, hold it. This thing right here is a form of tangent. And this is also a form of tangent, both of them with the negative in front. So this is negative tangent squared of x. This expression is negative tangent squared of x. So I write negative tangent squared of x, but because it's repeated 2 times, it's raised to the 2nd power. So the negative tangent squared of x squared gets rid of the negative sign, because negative times negative is positive. And all I have is tangent to the 4th of x. And that's the answer to number 6. Go on to the practice sheet on the next page, and good luck with your homework. If you have any questions, come on by to see me.